Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, feminist and literary perspective. I'm your host Joel, and joining me as always is your indomitable host Brian. Say hello, Brian.
Brian, hi. So, hi, hello. Indomitable?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
You cannot be dominated.
It's true.
I've also, as I was discussing before we got started, I have read about podcasts, I've read about structure, I've named all the sections of this episode, and I've also written time in my notes here in terms of timings. Time for Brian to make fun of you here if he chooses to.
Okay, your nose is too big. Your dad left your family because he doesn't love you. Your poetry is mellow.
Oh, ding, ding, ding. Time's up.
Okay.
Okay. So this week we are discussing Season 3, Episode 4, Beauty and the Beasts, plural. So, Brian, before we get into my first section, which I've titled Bronze Banter, would you like to give us our traditional Buffy and summary?
Is that because it's C tier?
Yes.
Because you got as opposed to being silver or gold level banter, it's bronze level banter.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Okay.
What they don't tell you is in Sunnydale there are two better clubs called the Silver and the Gold.
Yeah. There's also a platinum club, but that's about sex and when you're flying high. Actually, that's the Mile High Club. I'm getting mixed up. Platinum clubs are a thing, aren't they? They're like a thing you can get if you fly a lot or something.
Well, they are, but there's that great joke in wow, this is going to sink my coolness rating. The great joke in Frasier. But they go to the spa, and there's the gold room, and the silver room, and the platinum room, and then they find a diamond tier room, and they're like, what's in there? I can't rest until I open this door, and they open it, and they're back out in the street, because they've gone out the back door, which I think is a great metaphor.
Grass is greener, etc., etc.
Buffy and summary, please.
So this was first aired on the 20th of October 1998. It was written by James Whitmore Jr., who also wrote I Only Have Eyes For... Sorry, it was directed by James Whitmore Jr., who also directed I Only Have Eyes For You and Dead Man's Party. Mm-hmm. And it was written by Marty Noxon, the one and only. Our Buffy and summary is: violent deaths leads to the suspicion of Oz, who has escaped the cage he locks himself in 3 nights a month. Buffy suspects the returned feral angel she has found in the woods. In fact, a fellow student with an abusive relationship with his girlfriend has taken a drug that changes him into the brute he thinks she wants. Angel kills him. That was all so wrong. Wow. So first of all, violent deaths leads.
Mm-hmm. That's language.
That's not language.
Well, language
violent
is fluid, Brian.
Deaths lead. Right? Lead. Yeah. That's how do you get that into your book? Where anyway, and then this is the returned feral angel. It just makes it sound like some angel fell out of the sky and returned and is just murdering people.
Classic feral angel. This would be a place to make a reference to feral hogs, but I never put the time in to figure out what that meme was about.
That meme, yeah. So one guy was basically oh, you can't take my guns away from me. What'll I do about the 30 to 40 feral hogs that run around my back garden sometimes? And people, somewhat appropriately, went insane about this. They were like, lol, that's hilarious. Apparently it's an actual issue. I read into this. It's a genuine fucking problem in wherever he was. I want to say Louisiana, but that's probably an unfair presumption. But
Hogsville.
Apparently it's an actual issue in wherever he comes from, that feral hogs just roam and will wreak destruction on properties.
Why do you have to specify that as a man that had this problem though? That seems a bit misandrist. It could be anyone with this problem. Anyone could have this hog problem. But no, I find this more and more, specifically in the last couple of years, that memes come up and I'm like, you know what, I'm good. I have enough.
Yeah.
I think, and it's not a meme, but I remember vividly the first time something that happened was ASMR, where I didn't get it. I asked someone younger than me and I was like, what is this about? I actually can't parse it. Mm-hmm. And since then I've gleefully been like, I don't need to know about this.
Yeah,
I think the gold and blue dress was the last time I really tuned into things. You mentioned Marty Noxon.
I did.
I have this theory, this growing theory, the more we do this podcast, that Marty Noxon and her compatriots are going to be not undiscovered, but the real diamonds that we find out of this, because I follow Marty Noxon on Twitter. Yeah. And her Twitter is Marty Gleeful Schickster Noxon, and her bio is, I ruined Buffy and I will ruin you too. And she just seems great. And I
She did Sharp Objects, one of the TV
Absolutely.
events of the century.
But it's such a find for me. It's like I'm now actively excited when we come up to a Marty Noxon.
My favorite meme of all time, and I'm not taking the piss here, is
What a sentence to start with, Brian.
yeah. Is remember when Three Billboards was out? I can't remember what the full title of that movie is. Three Billboards outside something. Memphis? No, that's not
Brokeback
it.
Mountain.
It's at Brokeback Mountain. But the three signs she puts up are like raped and killed, and yet no charges. Why police or something like this?
Mm-hmm.
That's a real butchering of it. But someone like edited this because people edited that for a while because it was like, a joke format, so people like abused the shit out of it. And one of the ones was Amy Adams invented acting and yet no Oscar. Why Academy?
It's true. It's very true.
I love Amy Adams so much.
She's very good.
Yeah.
She would have been in this show if she was the right age, I think.
Yeah, she was in. She did weirdly low level things. So she was in Catch Me If You Can in 2004, which was I was going to say Martin Scorsese, but Steven Spielberg movie with Leonardo DiCaprio about that guy who basically pretended to be a pilot for years and wrote himself something in the region of $4 million of like fraudulent checks. So yeah, but she was in that. She married him and she had braces. I remember that for years. I was like, oh look, it's that girl who was in Catch Me If You Can.
Oh, weird, very weird. Yeah. So Bronze Banter, natural transition.
The Office. She was in The Office as well.
She was in The Office. She was in episode 4, I want to say, of the first season of the US
and
Office.
She didn't get Jim
when it was really bad.
It was actually season 2 she was in because it was after Pam had broken up with Roy because and then basically it was like, oh no, Jim loves Pam and Pam broke up with her boyfriend for Jim, but now Jim is in a relationship with another woman. She's red haired and we hate her.
A shoe saleswoman.
Was she?
She brought shoes to the office.
Purses.
Sorry, it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're uncharacteristically off topic, and maybe slightly distracted because I gently pushed our cat Booker out of the way because he was about to try and turn off the recording, and I think I might have murdered him. He fell quite catastrophically on the glass table.
But
he looks cool. He's doing fine. So Bronze Banter. So usually this is about, when we try to talk about interesting things that happened to us this week, and God, the pressure to be interesting every week. But it's usually stuff that's slightly unrelated to Buffy. But specifically, my birthday was in the relatively near past, and for which, unsurprisingly, I got Buffy related merch. And this is something that's happened to me my whole life. There was one year, my 10th birthday, which was entirely Harry Potter. Like every single thing, top to bottom, was Harry Potter. But I got some three very cool infographic.
with Harry Potter, isn't it just bottom to bottom?
Ho ho ho. Neville Longbottom indeed. But I got 3 very cool infographic books about Buffy. I got the one I have in my hand right now, which is Slayer Stats, which are actually some pretty good statistics and diggy knows about Buffy. I got a in-universe grimoire or magic book, supposedly written by Willow Rosenberg.
Yeah, which actually seems pretty cool.
Yeah, see, I get a lot of this stuff. People often get me TV show related stuff, so the quality varies. Actually, Buffy specifically has some terrible merchandise. People have produced things that just were not up to the standard fans deserve.
See all of the Buffy games, basically.
Yeah, and even specifically just like replicas of, say, stakes or books that were like bizarrely misprinted. Like, it's a common thing. These are actually quite good. So this is good. The magic book written by Willow looks quite interesting, and also the Watcher's Diaries 20-year anniversary of Buffy is going to be well referred to. But specifically from Slayer Stacks, which is published by Insight Editions, I found a couple of interesting ones which are kind of relevant to what we're doing at the moment. And I may even tweet some pictures of these because they're just really beautifully illustrated. One's called called Stabby Pointy Things. Buffy's more than just a stakeholder. See what they did there. Basically, different weapons that she uses throughout the series. So obviously we have the stake. We have Mr. Pointy, which is inherited from Kendra, and which she has bronzed at one point apparently.
Oh
yeah. There's Olaf's Troll Hammer, too heavy for ordinary humans and vampires, but good for using on Gogs, which he used most prominently on Glory in season 5. There's a frying pan used by Buffy and Anya.
Okay.
That I don't specifically remember.
I believe it though.
but much more. These early seasons are much more weapon heavy, I think. So we've the rocket launcher, which was as present from Xander on our 17th birthday, used by the judge on the judge. There is the jackal knife, which is Faith's signature knife that she uses later in the season as a gift from the mayor. And it's also the exact same knife used in the Star Trek film Nemesis.
You're telling me that?
Yeah. It's the Tom Hardy who looks unrecognizable in it. He's an anemic clone of Picard, or Patrick Stewart, uses the same knife as Faith in the, I want to say, 2002 film Star Trek Nemesis.
Spit then.
There is the crossbow, which is just used by everyone, and it's this weapon. Buffy, Kendra,
absolutely
Angel,
no
Giles,
effect, right?
They all think it has more stopping power than it does, but it's their like let's get serious weapon. There's the Hunga Munga, which we mentioned in the season 3 opener, used only once but appears in the titles of 66 episodes because of that shot. And it's a really unusual looking weapon. It's completely asymmetrical, and my famous incongruously, but it's the Ingrat, which also known as the Scythe, from season 7, which is a key to the finale, used by Buffy, Faith, and the potential Slayer Rona. Just the thing for slicing misogynistic preachers in half, growing up. And has since become, obviously is included in the logo of this particular podcast, but has generally become a symbol of Slayers and kind of the post-chosen Buffy milieu. As obviously, I think, a quite important literal symbol in the Buffy universe. So there's that. There's a lot of other interesting things in there. There's a good few other interesting sections which I'll return to as we go on. And just very briefly, I'll mention I'm only sleeping all the times that Giles is knocked unconscious. Starting with when Catherine Madison, who is Amy's mother, knocks him unconscious with a desk in season 1, episode 3, The Witch, and ending apparently with his magical duel with Willow, which in
he doesn't get knocked out at all in season 7.
No, apparently not. Well, I suppose he's not touching things for most of it because he's the first, quote unquote. But in Grave, which is episode 22 of season 6, an honourable mention to Cordelia, who in season 3, episode 11, Gingerbread, says, "How many times have you been knocked out? Anyway, I swear one of these times you're going to wake up in a coma."
That's pretty good. It's a shame we are, because we had planned on what we're going to talk about here before last night, during which we watched the finale of You're the Worst, which is a very odd TV show released on FX and only finished a couple of months ago. But it was it was released on FX and then it was moved to FX's brother station FXX because it was didn't have enough of an audience. I just fell down the Wikipedia rabbit hole. Okay, but it's really good. It's about two people who are really awful people, and them trying to love each other and shit. But it's really good, and the finale is stellar. So if you're looking for a TV show to watch and you want to watch 13 episodes in a season, comedy for 5 seasons of a comedy show with people you will hate but also love, then go ahead and do that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, do you want to get into the patrolling section? Okay. So not really, actually. No, of course not. So in this episode we have basic premise, odd-centric episode, and we have Buffy does what Buffy does great, which is the little plot lines taking over in the background. Faith is around, but she's not really central, and just things are developing. But it's very much about Oz is worried that he is the one killing these people as he's kind of getting out. Yeah, and thematically, it's all about masculinity and inspection of just the suggestion that men are inherently evil or inherently have the potentiality for evil and stuff like this, which we'll discuss, obviously. Yeah, it's 100% one of those episodes which have been handled with varying success about the concept of toxic masculinity and the inherent potential for violence that men have, if nothing else, because of how they're societally what's the word I'm trying to say, conditioned or developed, or their place in society. Nurtured, yeah. Absolutely. So interestingly enough, if we are going to be talking about toxic masculinity in general in this episode, this episode has been criticized for years and years by people, specifically because they see it as an anti-male episode of Buffy, something that people generally tend to identify as being a consistent thing in Marty Noxon episodes specifically. So unfortunately, I didn't find any first-hand accounts of this. I didn't go trawling the forums or anything like that. The live journal. Yeah. Deep web. But so Mark Field specifically writes about this episode, that people have for years spoken about this episode as being anti-male. This is really focused on the fact that Faith at one point says all men are beasts. and people have taken that as being the director, the authorial voice there, essentially, which is a bit problematic for a couple of reasons. One of which is that the next scene after that scene break, Buffy's relating this to Willow and says, "Oh yeah, Fate said that all men are beasts." And Willow says that's a bit of a generalization. And Buffy says, "Yeah." And then a couple of scenes later, when she's talking to Mr. Platt, she says, he says there are demons inside of all of us. So this episode definitely does look at toxic masculinity, but Buffy as a show very much is of the opinion that people have demons inside them, metaphorically, that express themselves, that aren't exclusive to masculinity. And even then, at the same time, I mean, like, the reason that men get, portrayed in this manner, in this kind of TV show, is that you're writing about young women, and the number one threat to young women are young men and older men.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, fucking fine, go ahead, write about the fact that you have people like Pete who are like genuinely abusive.
So Pete being, so basically Scott, who is her Buffy's couple of episodes kind of boyfriend.
Scott Hope, yeah.
Yeah, and introduces his two childhood friends, Debbie and Pete, are in a relationship, and essentially they seem like disaffected youths to a certain degree, kind of over it, but actually Pete is being quite abusive to, I know why linguistically we put in qualifiers there, it's being abusive to Debbie.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the context, and that he... essentially, while Oz feels that he may have been responsible for these murders, it's actually completely unrelatedly to really anything. It's Pete doing these rage murders.
Absolutely. So that's like absolutely the case. So Pete essentially is just the like epitome of toxic masculinity. There's suggestions that he's been accessing this kind of aggression through alcohol, and he kind of like convinces her that he has to be like this because of her. She's made him like this. And eventually he doesn't need the liquid he's brewed anymore. He can just need the anger is inside of him, essentially. He
literally develops a masculinity toxin.
Yeah.
It's a comically green, glowing mad scientist beaker full of rage.
Yeah.
That turns him physically into a masculine monster.
It's true. But on the other hand, you have two extremely positively portrayed men. So you have Oz, who, kind of seems like the well-adjusted man who recognizes that there's an inherent aggression in the way that we cultivate young men, which is a very weird way to put it, but the way that young men are brought up, and who says, like, okay, well, metaphorically, I have to restrain myself and put myself in a situation where I can't harm other people, which is like, responsible. And then you have Angel, who, while portraying that kind of aggression in this episode, very much clear, like, wants to be redeemed and wants to find, he ends the episode on his knees, like saying Buffy, and like basically like, asking for help, essentially, in finding a way from his both. I mean, like, he's not only trying to be redeemed from the act of this episode, in which he does fairly horrifically kill Pete. He strangles him with a chain. I think
it's fairly inarguable that Pete is human.
Yes.
And Angel kills him to defend Buffy.
Pete has been affected by the Hell-maddened energies, but no, human teenager. But Angel's also, of course, looking for forgiveness and for redemption from his Angelus actions.
Well done, Brian.
Did I get it?
You got it right.
Yes.
But
that was a lot of talking. I'm sorry.
Specific? No, that's all podcasts are. As I saw someone tweet today, podcasts are just friends you don't have to make an effort with.
Yeah.
But no, and also it's important to contextualize in terms of these themes that we have in this. That Buffy discovers Angel feral in the woods, and for a period of the episode worries that he is in fact the person murdering everyone. And so, but you're perfectly right, which is that there's some small involved point to make about how, and this is how this point starts for people, not all men and are all men capable of this, and of course not all men to the same degree, of course in not the same context, and of course many will never be applicable to this, but like that's not an interesting thing to talk about, because the reality is that like women and people are a threat from men disproportionately.
And I mean, like, if you look at it, I mean, for the woman who's been abused, the woman who's been, like, attacked, it is all men. You know, it's for a lot of the time, it's they don't feel safety around men. They
represent a threat, even if that threat is not going to be actualized.
Yeah, exactly. Or I know. I mean, I think the not all men thing is just such a funny one. It's so like, it's so specifically like, people find it much harder to grok, I think, than the Black Lives Matter thing. But the Black Lives Matter thing, I'll never understand how people take issue with it. Like, I mean, it's for the first time, not for the first time, it's the having to like tell people that like people who are black being alive, that's important, you know? And people are like, oh, well, you know, all lives matter. It's like, saying that, like, you know, black people are important and should be alive isn't to the exclusion of anyone else, you fucking dopes.
But see, I find that the problem with this, and why there is objection to an episode like this in Buffy, and why there can be, is there's a certain kind of person, a certain kind of perspective, which thinks that there's only so much to go around of any given thing, and that if your life matters 10% more, mine matters 10 less. If you get married too, my marriage is diluted somehow.
Yeah,
and so by saying that, by highlighting that some men, many men, maybe a worryingly disproportionate trend of men are dangerous, somehow take something away from people who aren't doing that. And in every one of those conversations, the answer is what you're saying may in some cases have be technically true, maybe, but it's not relevant. It's not germane to the conversation. Just because something is true doesn't mean it's worth what you do only have a certain amount of time for is the time you give to talking about something, and it can have more impact.
Yeah.
Talking about how we can address these issues. And what this episode shows is like the stuff with Oz, and even Mr. Platt, who is a kind of classic compassionate teacher, someone who is making a genuine effort with Buffy.
So he has to die, of course.
Yeah, but like a strong male figure in her life for a brief period. Those are a perfect example of men who are not themselves aggressors but are victims of toxic masculinity, because it affects men as well, men who are not directly responsible for, you know, violent and heinous things. And I think Oz is a great one to give this werewolf storyline to, because he does earn that kind of status as just like a decent person who does not have, and even like the way that he is the one who, when he notices that Debbie has been beaten by Pete, he's the one who kind of very calmly says, hey, is there anything you want to talk about? I know there's something you need to talk about. He is, you know, this is a logic phrase, but he is a good guy. He's a good person.
Yeah.
He's a good man.
Yeah.
He's a good role model in many ways for what men should be like. And for him to have to deal with these demons, for Angel to have to deal with, you know, Angel specifically being quite a good person, having to deal with the terrible acts in an earlier part of his life and all that. That's a really important metaphor, and I think it distracts from the value in that usually to say, oh, but you know, this is slandering men. It's like the objective is not to do that, so don't make it into that. Yeah?
I mean, like the suggestion there is that like Angel has to atone for things that he hasn't necessarily done. You know, as in can you necessarily hold him accountable for what Angelus did? Like it's hard to say, but I mean, he feels deeply responsible, and that is like that's a great metaphor for, like, you know, like a well-adjusted man's perspective within, like, you know, the culture of masculinity that we have, is that, you know, at some point you have to say no, like, you know, I'm not responsible for these individual actions. I'd benefit from them, however, and also I need to make it right. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think in some ways this is where your real life brain has to synthesize with your geek brain, because on one hand, as a geek, I want to know, where is Liam's soul? At what point does Liam end? Does Angela start and Angel start and all that?
Yeah, sure.
But the important point of the writing is, on many ways, on many levels, Angel will feel like that the person who did that was another person. In many ways, that might be technically true. We all change throughout our lives. Maybe not as exaggeratedly as Angel does, but that concept that it feels like a different person did the things in your past and you still have to suffer for them.
Mm-hmm.
You will never be allowed to find out whether it was Angel or not, because that absolves him in a way that's not narratively useful.
Yeah.
In real life, people don't get that absolution, and so he can't get that in the story. He has to deal as a person, because Buffy as a show is not about giving magical solutions to real life problems. It's about magically contextualizing and exaggerating things just enough to bring them into sharp relief, which I think is great. And specifically this episode, even though it has some slightly some slightly exaggerated and theatrical moments, what I thought was interesting is one of the asides at the end of the episode when they explain, "Oh, Pete, we found his chemistry books and he was making a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde potion," and they have a line specifically where Willow says, "Oh, but he wasn't under the influence of anything. This was just plain old Pete." And they ask, "Oh, did something make him do this?" And they explicitly say, "No, it was just him."
Yeah, it's kind of like, in some ways, reading this as a pretty sensitive guy in the negative sense there, you're probably looking at this being like, oh, why do other people get excuses of, like, influenced by a demon or et cetera, and this guy is just a bad guy, an abusive guy. You're probably looking at being like, oh, that's not fair. But just abusive bad people who are just angry and want to hurt the people around them exist, so fuck off. So Mark Fields has talks quite a bit about this episode.
Cool, Mark Fields.
Good old Mark Fields. And he does highlight the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing, which I haven't actually read, and you have, so we'll talk about that in a second. But he highlights it as very emblematic of just Jungian theory generally. So Jungian, theory being about, I was going to say a fursona, but what am I trying to say here?
Does Oz have a fursona, Brian? Is that what you're trying to say?
He clearly does, but the kind of the shadow selves, and what am I trying to say here? Shadow selves, the shadow self wandering the world, animalistic, that needs to be essentially integrated. What happens here is that Pete, when seeing his animalistic shadow self, instead of integrating it, acknowledging it, and trying to integrate it into his personality, he lets the animalistic self integrate him. Yeah, and basically he notes about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. According to Jung, he quotes Wikipedia here, which whatever. But according to Jung, the shadow sometimes overwhelms a person's actions. A man who is possessed by a shadow is always standing in his own light and falling into his own traps, living below his own level. Hence, in the terms of the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it must be Jekyll, the conscious personality, who integrates the shadow, and not vice versa. Otherwise, the conscious becomes the slave of the autonomous shadow. So, it's just an interesting one where you see Angel and Oz fully attempting to integrate in a healthy way their shadow selves and their difficulties. Pete allows himself to be subsumed and consumed by that. And
I think you're on the money there in terms of quoting that the conscious self has to be able to articulate, and in that articulation can incorporate and integrate the shadow self. And Pete is kind of very inarticulate. He's very dismissive of the talk therapy that Mr. Platt wants to do. He derives Debbie's attempt to talk about her problems, and he's very much just like a screaming beast.
He also has a very telling little moment of homophobia. So he's talking about how the Mr. Platt has them writing a dream journal. And how he'd be like, oh, Barbie has her dream journal, etc. And dear diary, how come Ken hasn't come around since he got that earring? So, i.e., Ken's a homosexual.
This was a specific thing.
Barbie dream diary?
No, but the Ken with the earring, there was like...
Oh, really?
It's either an urban legend or it was an actual issue, but there is a specific thing that it was like the gay Ken, essentially. The gayer Ken.
She also says at one point when Buffy... walks away and he's still talking to Scott, he says, check out Scotty, liking the manic depressive chick. So, i.e., very disrespectful towards people with
mental health difficulties,
perceived mental health difficulties.
And all that, yeah. Which in fairness, but Buffy does have Buffy has a lot of PTSD. She's a lot of repression and a lot of maybe not repression but compartmentalization, and a lot of survivor's guilt, and just a sense of everything being her responsibility, which is why it's so... There's this moment of real relief in this episode where, Mr. Platt doesn't talk down to her and has that access that is always granted to people who talk to her as a person. And she's starting to open up, and she clearly needs it. She clearly articulates she needs someone to talk to. And they have this very funny kind of Chekhov's gun where they set up initially when everything's A-okay, him facing away from her, looking out the window, smoking a cigarette when she comes in. Talking to her, and at the end when she finds him dead, she does that thing where she's talking at the dead body, not realizing.
Says, don't turn around. I just want to get this out.
Exactly,
I just want to get this out there.
His cigarette has melted all the way or burned all the way down. But she talks about, and it's quite an affecting scene from Sarah Michelle Gellar, where she talks about how she really needs someone to talk to, and maybe he could finally be it. And then to find out that like Pete is eating his eyeball apparently.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. Clawed his face off.
I think for that actor only had 1 or 2 scenes, but I think he actually did quite a good job of that bit role.
Do you want to talk about that actor?
I know he's
No. Do you want me to talk about his actor? So, do you recognize him?
I recognize him. I don't.
Did you watch The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody at all? I didn't, but you might have because you love those twins.
Okay, I like them now.
Okay,
I didn't, but I recognize he's on Scrubs, so I recognize
he was in
him
Scrubs.
from,
He was huge in Scrubs. More importantly, I looked into him. He killed a woman.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, in a drink driving accident in 1991. He served I don't think he actually served any time in prison in the end because he had money. But yeah, he killed a woman in 1991.
That's potential wild accusation to make on the record that he got off because he had money.
Okay, sorry.
Phil Lewis.
Yeah, him. But he did kill a woman, and or in a drunk driving accident, a woman was killed when he was driving the other car.
Oh Jesus!
And he was supposed to have like a 5-year sentence, and the judge basically commuted all of it, barring 1 year, and he had that like was a suspended sentence. All this kind of stuff that happens in the U.S. legal system. But yeah. Mad, eh?
Not what I expected. That was not where I saw that conversation going.
I know, yeah. It's kind of like Matthew Broderick, just another person who killed a person. I think Matthew Broderick killed 2 people in Donegal.
In Ireland, with the Irish connection.
Yeah. Yeah, so you read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right?
Yeah, that's brief enough.
Yeah. Robert Louis Stevenson, I want to say. Yeah, Scottish writer anyway. But what I understand of the novel or short story is that like the impactful thing about it is that it's not that the guy, when he comes out and like talks to the people when he is the Mr. Hyde persona, it's not that he's like a raging, violent, explosive character. It's that he has subtle, disturbing changes.
Oh yeah,
and he's like very like, he's violent and evil, but he's not crazy.
Yeah, it's a classic kind of archetypal monster which has been kind of had its subtlety pounded out of it by various
years
portrayals and expressions and examples. But no, he's not actually a slavering beast. It is fundamentally something which brings out the cruelty in him. He carries himself slightly differently. He has a very different cast to his face. The warmth goes out from the intelligence, and it becomes a shrewdness and cruelty and meanness, and very much as when, as Mr. Platt talks in this episode about Angel turning into Angelus, although not realising that's what he's talking about, how he turned mean and wasn't the same person and the warmth went away. That's the Jekyll and Hyde thing. It is a metaphor for that kind of sudden turn of you're looking at someone you recognise, but they're not at home anymore.
Sure. So obviously very relevant here, like just not just with Pete, but also with Angel and Angelus's turn in Innocence specifically. And I thought there was a really specific highlighting of that whole Innocence episode in this episode, not just with Buffy talking about how she had a boyfriend and he turned mean to Mr. Platt. In this episode, Scott specifically tells Debbie that basically it was pressure from her to become like a better man or more masculine man,
etc.
Yeah, that made him into what he is. Essentially, he says like, you did this to me. An Angel in Innocence specifically says to Buffy, you made me the man I am today. So I would draw some really like some pretty big highlights, pretty clear connections between those two points. Apparently Robert Louis Stevenson was a cocaine user, or like presumed to have been such by a lot of scholars.
Did he also kill a woman in a carriage crash
I don't
or something?
think so, but maybe. But so that'll like draw some comparisons between that and the vaguely shrouded alcohol imagery in this episode.
Sure, yeah.
Did you, Joel, feel that Debbie is punished in this episode?
Punished by who?
So she is killed. She's killed. Like, she dies. She's portrayed as like there's quite a horrifying scene in which Buffy and Willow go to find her in the bathroom. She's trying to cover up her bruises that Pete has left in her face from hitting her, and she refuses to tell him anything. She's clearly like suffering some Stockholm syndrome, and she basically breaks down into, what's she saying? She says like, my own fault, or I'm bad. Oh no, she starts repeating over and over again, I'm bad. No, it's not I'm bad, because that's Faith. What did she say? It's my own fault or something?
Yeah, which basically kind of goes into repetitive pattern, and Willow, kind of glibly says, I think we broke her, etc. Yeah.
And then Buffy says she was already broken. But they don't treat her with very much like affection, care, or like,
they don't know. It's kind of the one thing in these kind of episodes that I don't know if it's a clash of the feminist themes with the genre that it is in.
Sure.
Because the genre, people die, and the genre doesn't respect. In the genre convention, you don't respect collaborators, no matter how intentional or unintentional they are. As soon as you're tainted by being close to the villain, you often die, and are often at fault. But yeah, I find it makes Buffy and Willow come across slightly unsympathetic in terms of not speaking in their voice, because I think
they would both be very sympathetic towards
no matter what the context would be. Yeah, I think so too. And then on the other side, I see, okay, yeah, she dies. But women do die in this context, and women are, like, is she punished? Probably. Are women punished in this context? Yes. And I suppose that maybe I'd feel differently if it was a gay character, do you know what I mean? Which is, probably a prejudice and a privilege to highlight, but I almost feel that if you had her getting a completely scot-free, pun adjacent, not intended, would that be a bit of a magical ending? I don't know. I don't have a clean answer for that one, because it's a very messy situation trying to overlay magical themes on top of domestic abuse to put it as plainly as possible.
Yeah. She does have a very sad line where she says that she tells Oz that she walked into a doorknob, which for me, of course, called into mind the Roddy Doyle novel, The Woman Who Walks Into Doors, which is all about domestic abuse. It's actually a really, really stunning novel. I think it's probably his best from my money's worth. Yeah, it's very good. I actually quite liked it. Yeah. And I wouldn't be a Roddy Doyle fan, but it was a weird one. So, like, I mean, fully domestic abuse and alcoholism are the monsters of the week this week, along with toxic masculinity and inspection of masculinity. And it was heady stuff.
Yeah, and I think maybe the most useful contribution I can make to it, after having so many highfalutin opinions about how people should engage with this, is, I can see both sides of it. I don't feel fully equipped on this one to say I know in my gut whether it was appropriate or not, because it's not applicable to me. Yeah, sure. That's kind of my main feeling, is that I can feel the gap of experience here. Yeah. I think it makes, what I will say is, as an outsider to Black situation in a number of senses, a number of variations on outsider, that I think it makes a genuine attempt to discuss it. Yeah. Whereas we've said other episodes have not done that and have done poorer versions of that. I think it's a challenging thing to bring in, while still balancing all the other things you have to do just with a Buffy episode. Yeah. And I think, as I've said before, the real value of genre convention is not by creating things that don't exist, but slightly exaggerating things so we can see them in sharper relief and in 40 minutes. Yeah. And I think it does pretty well, but I think, sometimes in Buffy, sometimes the men get away with more from a writing point of view than they should, and sometimes the women are treated a little bit worse than they should, but on average I think it does pretty well. Yeah, I mean, like, the thing is that we're criticizing probably the best show in terms of, we're holding it to an incredible standard. Yeah, we're high standard. Like, we're looking at basically like what was probably the most important feminism show for feminism in the 90s. So let's bear that in mind. The opening and closing monologues from Willow and then Buffy, where Willow is reading to Oz at the beginning because they're holding him in the cell, and at the end because Buffy is reading to, or I'm not sure if she's specifically reading to Angel, but she's certainly reading thinking about it in her head. Yeah. But it's from Jack London's called The Wild, which is the companion book, of course, to White Fang, the two very famous novels about just nature, and basically it's about a dog who's a family dog, but gets let out into the wild and finds himself, and it's very much narrated from the perspective of the dog in various points, but finds himself finds an animalistic nature in him, and when he gets back, it's always there in him. But they're just wonderful books. I fucking love Jack London. So yeah, go off and read them if you fancy picking up a good old classic. Yeah, absolutely. And we have that, we established that framing narrative there, that framing device of Oz now goes to the book cage, which is now fulfilling its probably most iconic purpose. They're reading to him. He has up his little privacy towels for when he has to like change back. Xander comes along to tag in for Willow, and his one job is to stay awake to make sure that Oz doesn't murder someone and has to live with the guilt, and he intentionally falls asleep as soon as he gets there.
He's just the worst.
I also have a note here that says Xander makes reference to handling Oz's dick, which is a real thing that happens. It's a whole thing about, you know, how he's going to handle him. It's like, I don't mean handle in his nether region. It's a whole thing, but he specifically, it's a very uncomfortable moment. I wasn't happy with it.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair.
We have running parallel with this very much the reintroduction of Angel in terms of Buffy finding him and taking it upon herself to take care of him in the mansion, ties him up with manacles in the mansion to keep him safe, really. Specifically manacles and handcuffs that are found in a box along with several of Drusilla's dolls.
So they're definitely spikes as sex cuffs, chains, yeah.
And that's kind of the arc for the next 4 episodes or so until she reveals, appropriate enough in Revelations, that he's still alive. But yes, this opportunity for her to really work through her trauma in a very practical sense, away from other people. And we have specifically the intimation that he's returned from the Hell dimension, that he's lived there being tortured for 100 years or so. I find that what's alluded to, it's not contradictory, but what's alluded to in this episode is it's the same Hell dimension that Buffy went to in Aang.
Yeah, which isn't consistent logically, like time-wise, but anyway.
No, and that's fine, but it's just the way they handle it here. But specifically, there's a connection there with the chap in Aang who remembers
Ricky, I think.
Ricky. So even after he forgot his own name, he still remembered his girlfriend's name.
Yeah.
And similarly here, the word that Angel says that he remembers, his first word is Buffy, and that he kind of has obviously held on to that.
Yeah. But Jaws is a very nice line where Jaws is great in this episode, of course, naturally. But he says that it would take someone of great character and something else to withstand that long of torture and to be able to remain human at all. So of course it's the beginning of the Angel is as stalwart and true and good, the
champion narrative of the powers that be.
Yeah, and that is the thing. Like that's the actually no, I already said that in the last episode. Remember?
Did we?
No, about how this is setting up the whole premise of Angel.
Sure. Well, I can say a little bit on that. I'm just gonna say. Yeah, so he's champion of the powers that be, and this is a through line where it really kind of focuses his purpose, focuses his obsession, his love of Buffy, which is kind of a really solid and consistent heroic thing that he has going forward. Makes him the source of or connected to the Shanshu prophecy and the Troclong and all those things that kind of carry the lore of Angel stem out of this episode. And he never does find out definitively why he was brought back. It's always strongly implied that it's the powers that be, and I think that's probably consistent. But that little bit of mystery, I think, is actually really quixotic.
That's a good one. Nice.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna get some Buffy bits. You ready for him?
Hit me with the Buffy bits. Okay,
so Willow has a Scooby-Doo forensic box.
She does. Her
lunchbox with all her forensic tools. It's Scooby-Doo. This is the 7th Sunnydale High staff to be killed. And Faith at one point says that men from Manimal to the English Patient are all beasts. Manimal, you probably know the English Patient was a 90s movie with adaptation of it. It was an adaptation of the novel. It was in the 90s. With Kristen Scott Thomas and Ralph Fiennes. Was it Joseph Fiennes?
Ralph Fiennes.
Was it? Okay, cool. But Manimal was a TV show that only aired in 1983, in which a man turns into animals to solve crimes.
Like, yet another thing that I know the name of because of things like Simpsons and Buffy and like that, but which we shouldn't know because it didn't apply to us.
Yeah, absolutely. One scene I'll highlight from the episode was when they are trying to... Scott and Oz are fighting now that Oz is in werewolf form, and he has a fun line where he's like, rules change, and things change. What does he say?
Rules have changed.
Rules have changed. And he's like, I'm going to beat you up now.
Yeah, Oz's action hero moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think just that's Scott, but I meant Pete. But Willow is shooting one of them and accidentally shoots Giles.
Amazing.
It is incredible. Amazing. And Giles is just like turns around and goes, oh, right. Bloody priceless. And then collapses. That is wonderful.
That and him in Dead Man's Party saying, do you like my mask? I love it. It raises the dead. Bloody Americans. Yeah. I love his genuinely indignant English behavior. It's
me
very,
too.
very endearing.
And one of the rumors going around about Pete and what happened there, and none of them address the fact that he's also fucking dead and that his neck snapped. How the fuck did that happen? One of them say, a freshman told me he had 8 iced lattes and lost it. Which is the most Californian thing I've ever heard.
Well, in fairness, like if you had 8 lattes, you'd be able to hear colours.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Do you want to give us some Buffy bits?
Yeah. So I would say that similarly in that Scooby-Doo lunchbox scene, what I really enjoyed was Willow being so dedicated to taking care of Oz that she focuses in. She's doing an autopsy on a corpse, basically, or doing an investigation. The other two are getting sick, and she finishes her work very professionally and then immediately faints because she's disgusted with what she's doing. It was a very, very Willow moment. So this episode we kind of progress the werewolf thing, which I do think is just a really interesting part of Buffy, because Buffy's about vampires, but they also do a werewolf thing, which is like not like other werewolf things. It's very interesting. They completely changed the kind of weird rat makeup that was initially introduced to the werewolves. So initially you had the werewolves being kind of like, grey, wolf-like head, very specifically like a wolf man kind of thing. This is a very unique stylistic choice going forward, because we have a darker brown fur. They tend to move on 4 legs rather than being a bipedal monster. It has a weird, like a really terrifying human-like face that's completely hairless, which apparently the production staff referred to as the gay possum.
Beautiful. I
used to do fundraising calls. Hey, you went to our school. That was good, wasn't it? Want to give us money? That kind of thing. And one of the things they always tell you about that kind of cold calling is, as soon as you make the ask, you stop talking.
Yeah.
You ask, you say, so will you be interested in donating? And you let them answer. And that's the moment in which they feel the pressure to donate. So I feel like we leave it at that. I say the production staff refer to it as the gay possum.
Explain yourselves, straights.
That's it. The only other thing in this episode that I highlight, because she's such a background character in this in this one, is Faith, which is great. I love Faith just being supporting cast, but her listening to her rock songs or heavy metal on her tape player, and just bopping around, keeping an eye on Oz, and Buffy comes up and taps her on her shoulder, and she turns around and she decks Buffy. She decks her flag out. I was like, I totally understand it. I totally understand. Don't sneak up on me a few times. Yeah. Don't sneak up on people. No, I have pushed you out of bed because I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought you were a lizard man wearing your skin. Okay, well, Joel, you can only tell a story so many times in this podcast without sounding like a mad person, and also you can't talk about lizard people because that's anti-Semitic. Actually, it's apparently the whole lizard man trope of, like, everyone's being replaced by lizard people. That's actually a specific anti-Semitic trope. Oh, is it like a New World Order Jewish conspiracy? Exactly, like tinfoil hat kind of thing. People are fucking mad. Not Jewish people, obviously. The people who are anti-Semitic. Well, okay, I would hope, Brian, but like, by this point in our podcast, that people would know that we think that people who think Jewish people globally are being replaced by lizards, and that explains why Jewish people, quote unquote, are running the world. I think people would know that's not our opinion. You're right. You're right, but the people who are actually anti-Semitic tend to be normal in other ways, in a weird way, where it's just like blah 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 blah. I'm normal. Have you met my daughter Frances? And also, I hate Jewish people. And just like, oh my gosh, stop that. Why would you ever? Anyway. So some fashion notes for you, please. Faith is wearing a very, very wonderful all leather getup, where it's like, leather jacket. Sleeveless leather vest, leather pants. It's wonderful. If I could cosplay it, I absolutely would. Oh, you couldn't, and you can't, and I don't let it. Xander at one point is wearing like crimson red baggy pants, and I fucking hate it. And actually, at one point, I noted this. Jaws wears a nice blue shirt. And he looks quite well put together in this episode. And Buffy at one point is wearing like a nice kind of like cute young cardigan top. It's kind of quite sheer. And then when she goes to get slaying, she's changed into a leather jacket. And I was like, that's really nice that she's adapted her what she's wearing for the more practical purpose. A day and a night look, Yeah, exactly. Oz, I like Oz, but like he wears an enormous leopard print shirt. And I don't feel like leopard print was as in the 90s as Buffy and Sisk's it was. Yeah. And also, Mr. Platt does the same thing that Giles does occasionally, where he wears like a corduroy waistcoat but open.
Yeah, disgusting.
What's this epidemic about open waistcoats?
Not okay. Anyway, so do you have a death count for us?
I do have a death count for me, which I will share with you and with our listeners.
Which you definitely looked up before right now.
I did, and then I did other things. So various students killed by Pete in his rage. Off-screen Jeffrey Walken, killed by
The
Pete.
opening scene, yeah.
Pete Clarnger, which is an unusual surname. And that's the one who Oz knew, so specifically made him worried. Debbie, the unfortunately punished Debbie, killed by Pete. Stephen Platt, the kindly counsellor who never got to finish that cigarette.
The other person who, the biology teacher who's being nice to Buffy, also had the first name Stephen.
Yeah.
So there must be an epidemic of Stephen killings.
And there also was like an eye thing, because she found his broken glasses. And,
oh, true.
Yeah.
Oh.
And finally, the human Pete Clarnger, with his neck snapped by a feral
Angel.
I was going to say hog. Everything in my brain wanted to say hog. Pete is killed by Angel, who breaks out of his restraints dramatically, byronically, and somehow tracks down Buffy to save her.
Yeah.
Yeah,
of course.
So you want to move into the dusting, Brian?
This is all the part of the dusting.
Move deeper into the dusting. Move into the centre of the cloud, the Buffy Orc cloud.
Okay, cool. What's your rating, Joe?
So I'd probably give it a 6.8 gay possums.
Okay.
Because I think that I enjoy it. That gives a couple of points straight away. I like that it's Oz-centric. I like the angel and the fake stuff, and I think they make a really decent attempt to expand on a very difficult topic. What I thought brought it down was just the actual monster itself was very weak in terms of, the sci-fi episodes are always a little bit odd, but like it didn't compel me as a monster, quote unquote. And yes, some of I think the handling of Debbie from Buffy and Willow was left a little bit to be desired. I think you and I are seeing this repeatedly as we go forward. It's when the characters don't sound like themselves, that's when it kind of falters a little bit. So I'll rub it down a couple of
I was worried about that, if we're saying, the character doesn't sound like themselves when they're just doing bad things. But
these characters do plenty of bad things. Like Willow tries to end the world. Do you know what I mean? She flays him out. When Willow flays Warren, that's her in character voice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay, I'm going to give this episode 8.0, actually. 10 earrings out of 10. So I'm glad we stuck with a theme for our ratings. Yeah. I actually just thought it was quite successful, to be honest. I thought it had a point to get through, and it did it quite well. And I suppose I had such low expectations for this episode. I was expecting a very bland, monster of the week, boring episode that I was going to get not too excited about. And I really enjoyed it, actually. And I thought it dealt with the issue of masculinity, toxic masculinity, and the complexities thereof in a reasonably deft way. So yeah, I'm for it.
I think we've definitely gotten into a thing of, I think you've been giving your rating seconds for a while.
Have I?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're going to do yours first next time.
No problem.
Great. I think an interesting one.
Yeah.
An interesting one. And definitely one for the bank in terms of, Buffy's also kind of about masculinity sometimes as well.
Yeah. It's so nice having I don't know. It's so weird that we get to talk about this kind of episode for 40 minutes or something. Just because, in some ways it doesn't warrant a 40-minute discussion. But it's also, it's a nice privilege to be able to do it. Okay,
cool. So I think we're ready to move into just a very brief mini segment that I have inserted here, which I'm going to call Also Playing at the Bronze. Or I just want to give a little shout out, a little recommendation to another podcast that we come across occasionally in a similar space, where basically if you like this, you might like that too. So this week I'd like to recommend Watch If You Dare, which is a podcast which explores horror cinema through the eyes of a coward and the eyes of a long-term fan, with Aaron, who is the brave boy, and Derek, who is the coward. So they kind of do something similar to what we do, except for horror. They examine both recent films and older films, and kind of talk about it from the lens of someone who is coming to horror for the first time, which I think is quite interesting.
What if they watch High Life? We watched that during the weekend. It wasn't good. Actually, no, it was very well made.
I don't know if it was a horror film.
No, it wasn't a horror film. It was listed as a science fiction horror. I don't think it was.
Yeah, but I listened to most recently listened to an episode of theirs on Green Room, which is the with the late Anton Yelkin, and also with Patrick Stewart as a white supremacist.
Really good movie in lots of ways. I didn't love it, but I'd love to listen to that episode. I'd say it's really interesting.
Yeah, it was very engaging. So I recommend that. Watch If You There, and you can find them on Twitter at Watch If You There, as extends, and from there to the rest of their.
No, their Twitter actually doesn't link to doesn't link to their podcast or anything. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, so go check that out. And so lastly, just as we're kind of moving out of the dust cloud now, I want to say, okay, super fans, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Buffy Boys. We do really appreciate it. We appreciate you sticking with us. I haven't talked about this for a while, so I'm just going to say, if you kind of want to hear more from us during the week, or if you want to recommend us to people, you can follow us at buffyboys.com, got that URL, and on Twitter at Buffy Boys. That's probably where we're most active, and from there you can find Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff. We put a lot of Booker on the Instagram, if you want to.
He's a cat.
Yeah, and you can find our live journal and our Bebo account and everything there as well.
And if you want to email us suggestions, what's our email again?
It's buffyboyscast@gmail.com. Still trying to get in touch with buffyboys@gmail.com. So if you know them, send them my way.
It's actually a porn site, and they're like, leave us alone.
Yeah, I'm becoming plaintive in my emails. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And also, it does help us a lot as well if you can leave a review on iTunes or your podcasting app, just to let the innocent know that we're worth listening to, and just for us to know that you've enjoyed it. It's really cool when you see a review. I haven't seen a bad one yet, so don't do that.
Yeah, and also just like specifically, thanks Gary for writing a review. It was nice of you.
We really enjoyed it. I came across it and I screenshot it. It was nice. Thank you, Gary. So that's the dusting. What's the episode we're watching next week, Brian?
We're watching Homecoming next week, which is the episode where Buffy and Cordelia are competing to get Homecoming Queen.
Yeah, Slayer Fest 98.
Yeah.
And I actually hear there's an upstart, just really like kind of low key indie podcast about Buffy called Slayer Fest 98, which is
there?
Soon. No, there's like a really big Buffy podcast called Slayer Fest 98.
Oh, okay.
Relatively big, with Anthony Oliveira and some other real people.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I will listen to that. Okay.
I can't listen to other Buffy podcasts because it will just poison the well for me. It will seep into my brain. I'm so impressionable.
Yeah, you really are.
Okay, so we will see you next time. Thanks for listening. See you next time on Buffy Boys.
Yeah, it's Buffy Boys.
Yeah, Buffy Boys. Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.